In the heart of the arid African savanna, far removed from the noise and chaos of the modern world, the remote village of Nyamira lay bathed in a soft glow under a silver blanket of stars. The village was a collection of modest clay huts, scattered like whispers across the dry earth. A faint wind rustled through the leaves of the towering baobab trees, carrying the earthy scent of the land and the quiet hum of nocturnal life. It was a night like any other, or so the villagers believed, until a single cry shattered the tranquil stillness. The cry came from Zalika, a young healer revered for her deep knowledge of the ancient ways. Zalika stumbled toward the village clinic, clutching her stomach, her face pale with pain. Her braided hair stuck to her sweat-drenched skin as she gasped for breath, each step more agonizing than the last. Those who had been preparing for sleep hurried out of their homes, drawn by the sound of her anguish. Women whispered to one another, their eyes wide with fear, while the elders exchanged worried glances. Children clung to their mothers, peering out cautiously at the commotion. Inside the clinic, the air was heavy with tension. The small room was sparsely equipped, its shelves lined with jars of herbal remedies and a few modern medical tools. Dr. Kamari, a man whose steady hands and quiet resolve had saved countless lives, worked quickly. Though he had spent years in Nyamira, the villagers' beliefs and superstitions often clashed with his clinical understanding. Tonight, however, he was simply a doctor faced with what he thought was an ordinary labor. "Breathe, Zalika. Stay with me," Dr. Kamari urged, his voice calm but firm. Zalika groaned in response, her body writhing in pain as beads of sweat dripped onto the makeshift cot. Her hands gripped the sides of the bed with such force that her knuckles turned white. Villagers gathered outside the clinic, their murmurs growing louder. "Why would the healer need a doctor?" one man asked. "Perhaps it is a sign," muttered another, his voice tinged with unease. Elder Bako, the village's oldest and most superstitious resident, frowned deeply, his fingers tracing the charms hanging from his neck. "This is not normal," he declared. "Something is wrong." Inside, the tension reached its peak. Zalika let out one final, piercing scream, her body convulsing as she pushed with all her remaining strength. And then silence. The room grew still, the only sound a faint crackle of the oil lamp that cast flickering shadows on the walls. Dr. Kamari froze, his breath caught in his chest. In Zalika's trembling hands was not a crying baby, but an egg. Smooth and pristine, it gleamed faintly under the dim light, its surface unblemished and cold to the touch. It was larger than a bird's egg, yet small enough to fit comfortably in her palms. Strange markings etched across its surface seemed to shimmer for an instant before fading into stillness. Zalika stared at the egg, her wide eyes reflecting both awe and confusion. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "What is this? What does it mean?" Dr. Kamari, usually composed, was at a loss for words. His mind raced to find an explanation, yet none came. His medical training offered no answers for what lay before him. Outside, the villagers grew restless, their curiosity and fear mounting with every passing moment of silence from the clinic. The first to burst through the door was Elder Bako, his expression a mixture of suspicion and dread. His gaze fell upon the egg in Zalika's hands, and he recoiled as if burned. "This is no child," he spat. "This is an omen." Zalika's voice, weak but resolute, broke the tension. "I don't understand," she murmured, her fingers cradling the egg protectively. "I only know that this is part of me." Her words hung in the air, stirring an unspoken question among everyone present. Was this a miracle or a curse? The atmosphere grew heavier as the villagers outside began to chant prayers, some pleading for protection, others begging for clarity. The air seemed charged with something unexplainable, as though the land itself held its breath. Dr. Kamari placed a gentle hand on Zalika's shoulder, his voice low but steady. "Whatever this is, we will face it together. But we must first understand." As Zalika held the egg closer to her chest, a faint warmth spread through her fingers, a sensation that was neither alarming nor comforting. It was as if the egg pulsed with life, waiting for something, or someone, to unlock its secrets. The night was far from over, and the questions had only just begun. Zalika was not just another villager in Nyamira. She was a living connection to the land's heartbeat, and its unspoken stories. Her presence commanded respect and evoked unease in equal measure. From a young age, she had been different. Raised by her grandmother, Mwajuma, the village's revered healer, Salika was immersed in traditions that had been passed down through generations. Mwajuma's teachings were rooted in the balance of nature, the whispers of the wind, and the ancient rhythms of life that few dared to acknowledge openly. Salika learned to identify plants not only by their appearance, but by their essence, their spirit. It was said she could hear the land breathing and feel its pulse under her bare feet. But such wisdom came at a cost. As Salika grew older, the villagers began to regard her with a mix of admiration and fear. She could cure ailments that others deemed incurable and interpret omens that confounded even the elders. Yet, some whispered that her knowledge was not entirely of this world. Rumors of her speaking to the trees or wandering the plains under the light of a full moon gave rise to suspicion. For every life she saved, there was someone who claimed she meddled with forces beyond human comprehension. Days before the egg appeared, Salika began to experience dreams that left her restless and unsettled. In the first dream, she stood beneath a colossal baobab tree, its roots twisting like ancient veins into the earth. Perched on one of its branches was a bird unlike any she had ever seen. Its feathers shimmered gold, as though forged from the first rays of dawn. The bird's eyes, deep in knowing, seemed to pierce through her very soul. It spoke, not in words but in thoughts, its message weaving itself into her mind. "You will bring forth what others cannot," it said, its voice a melody and a warning all at once. When Salika awoke, the dream lingered like a shadow. At first, she dismissed it as a trick of her imagination, a product of the herbal fumes she had inhaled while preparing medicines. But the dream returned the following night, more vivid than before. This time, the bird's voice was urgent. "The land is choosing you," it said. "Life does not always take the form we expect." Salika found herself unable to shake the bird's cryptic words. She turned to Mwajuma's old texts, searching for meaning in the symbols and stories of their ancestors. Yet, no answers revealed themselves. As the days passed, the weight of the dreams began to manifest physically. Salika felt a heaviness in her chest and a strange warmth in her abdomen, as though something within her was stirring. She confided in no one, fearing that her visions would only deepen the villagers' mistrust. But her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "The land speaks in whispers. Only those who listen will understand." The night before the egg's arrival, Salika found herself drawn to the same baobab tree from her dreams. Its massive trunk loomed over her, its bark rough against her fingertips. The air was thick, charged with an energy she couldn't explain. As she placed her hand on the tree, she felt a faint vibration, as though the earth itself was humming beneath her. The golden bird appeared once more, this time not in a dream, but before her very eyes. Its presence was both majestic and unsettling. It tilted its head, regarding her with an almost human understanding. "What grows within you is not a curse, but a gift," it said. "Guard it well, for it will change more than you can imagine." Salika woke the next morning, unsure if what she had witnessed was real or another vision. But the heaviness in her body had intensified. Her breaths came in short bursts, and her pulse raced as though she were running a great distance. She knew then that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Her heart battled between fear and acceptance, each beat a reminder of the unknown path ahead. By the time she staggered into the clinic that fateful night, Salika was no longer just a healer or a woman of Nyamura. She was the bearer of a mystery that transcended the boundaries of her understanding, a mystery that seemed to be both a culmination of her lineage and a departure from everything she had known. The whispers of the villagers, the suspicions of the elders, and the cryptic messages of the golden bird all pointed to one undeniable truth. Salika's journey was far from over. The egg in her hands was only the beginning, a fragile yet profound symbol of something greater. What it meant, she did not yet know, but deep within her, she felt a faint glimmer of hope, as if the land itself was preparing to reveal its secrets. The once quiet village of Nyamura erupted into chaos. Whispers, quick and sharp like the hiss of a snake, slithered through the crowd gathered outside the clinic. The villagers spoke in low, urgent tones, their words heavy with fear and suspicion. Some clutched charms made of bone and wood, muttering prayers to ward off what they believed to be a dark force. Others stood frozen, eyes wide with disbelief. The sight of Zalika cradling the egg, her face pale and her body trembling with exhaustion, had shaken them to their core. For them, this was no miracle. It was an omen, a harbinger of doom cloaked in mystery. Elder Ao, whose voice carried the weight of generations, stepped forward. His hunched frame belied the authority he wielded over the village. His walking stick struck the ground with a deliberate thud, silencing the growing murmurs. "This is no child of Nyimra," he declared, his voice ringing with conviction. His words sent a ripple through the crowd, fueling their unease. "It is a curse brought upon us by meddling with forbidden spirits." Zalika, still clutching the egg as though it were part of her own flesh, raised her gaze to meet Ao's. Her eyes, once filled with the calm certainty of a healer, now shimmered with a mix of fear and defiance. "I did not ask for this," she said, her voice faint but steady. "It came to me just as the land speaks to all of us. Do you think I would bring harm to my own people?" Ao's eyes narrowed. "Your knowledge has always been unnatural, Zalika. Perhaps you have been chosen by something greater. But what if that something means us harm?" His words struck a chord with the villagers, many of whom nodded in agreement. The fear in the crowd grew tangible, crackling in the night air like the embers of a dying fire. Inside the clinic, Dr. Kamari found himself trapped between two worlds. On one hand, his medical training urged him to protect Zalika and dismiss the villagers' superstitions as baseless. On the other, he understood the deep roots of their beliefs, their trust in traditions that had guided them for centuries. He looked at Zalika, her body weak and trembling, and then at the crowd outside, their faces a blend of anger and desperation. His mind raced for a solution that could bridge the chasm between logic and faith. Stepping outside, Kamari raised his hands in a gesture of calm. "Listen to me," he said, his voice firm yet measured. "What Zalika holds may seem strange to us, but it is no reason to turn against her. She is one of you. She has healed your wounds, comforted your sick, and guided you through your darkest nights. If she says this is not a curse, why do you doubt her now?" The villagers wavered, their murmurs softening for a moment. But Elder Ao was not ready to relent. "Words will not save us if this brings ruin," he said, his tone sharper now. "We must act before it is too late, destroy the egg, and end this before it begins." Zalika's grip on the egg tightened as her heart raced. The thought of losing it filled her with an inexplicable dread, as if part of her very soul would be ripped away. "No," she cried, her voice breaking. "You do not understand. This is not a curse. It is something else, something the land has chosen to bring forth through me. Destroy it, and you may destroy more than you know." Ao scoffed, but the uncertainty in his eyes betrayed him. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances, their fear now mingled with doubt. In the silence that followed, the egg stirred faintly in Zalika's hands, emitting a soft warmth that seemed to radiate outward. A few villagers gasped, taking hesitant steps back, while others leaned in, their curiosity momentarily overcoming their fear. Dr. Kamari seized the moment. "If this is a sign, then we must seek to understand it before passing judgment," he said, his voice rising with urgency. "Destroying it without knowing its purpose could bring far worse consequences. We owe it to ourselves and to Zalika to approach this with caution." The tension in the air was thick, every word and movement amplifying the stakes. Ao's expression hardened, but he did not speak. The villagers looked to one another, their loyalties divided. Some began to step away, muttering about leaving the matter to the elders. Others stayed, their eyes fixed on Zalika, who now seemed more fragile than ever, yet filled with an unyielding resolve. In that moment, Zalika spoke again, her voice trembling but resolute. "This egg is not mine alone," she said. "It belongs to all of us, to this land. If you destroy it out of fear, you may never know the truth of what it could mean for Nyimra. I ask you, not as a healer, but as one of you, trust me." Her words lingered in the night, hanging like a fragile thread between hope and despair. The villagers remained silent, their collective breath held as they awaited the next move. The egg, still warm and mysterious, seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive with a secret it was not yet ready to reveal. The night stretched on, the questions multiplying, the answers remaining just out of reach. The night was heavy with an ominous stillness, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder rolling across the savannah. The air smelled of impending rain, a mixture of dust and moisture that clung to the skin. Salika lay restless on the cot in the clinic, her grip on the egg never loosening. As the storm approached, the faint glow began. At first, it was a soft flicker, subtle enough to be dismissed as a trick of the dim lantern light. But as the moments passed, the glow intensified, illuminating the intricate symbols etched across its surface. The light bathed the room in a golden hue, warm and otherworldly, casting long shadows that seemed to dance on the walls. Salika gasped as the egg grew warm in her hands, its pulse steady, almost alive. Her heart raced, torn between awe and fear. "It's alive," she whispered, her voice trembling. Dr. Kamari, who had been pacing the room in silent contemplation, turned sharply at her words. He approached cautiously, his eyes narrowing as he studied the markings now clearly visible under the glow. Each symbol seemed deliberate, carved with precision, and yet they were unlike anything he had ever seen. Kamari spoke, his voice low but steady. These are not random. They resemble the old carvings on the stones outside the village, the ones the elders say were left by our ancestors." His fingers traced the patterns in the air, careful not to touch the egg. But why would they appear here? On this, the question hung in the air, unanswered, as the storm outside drew closer. Word of the egg's glow spread quickly through the village, and soon the clinic was surrounded by curious and fearful faces. The villagers whispered among themselves, their fear rekindled. Elder Ao, his skepticism unwavering, pushed his way to the front of the crowd. "This is no sign of hope," he declared. "It is a warning. The ancestors do not speak lightly. Whatever this is, it must not be allowed to bring ruin to Nyamura." Salika, her strength waning but her resolve firm, met Ao's gaze. "You call it a warning, but how do you know it is not a message? Something meant to guide us, not destroy us." Her words carried a quiet authority that silenced the murmurs. Even Ao hesitated, his scowl deepening as doubt flickered across his face. Dr. Kamari, desperate for clarity, suggested summoning Nia, the village historian. Known for her deep knowledge of Nyamura's past and the ancient texts passed down through generations, Nia was the one person who might offer answers. The villagers, divided between fear and curiosity, reluctantly agreed. A runner was sent to fetch her from her secluded home on the edge of the village. When Nia arrived, her presence commanded attention. Draped in a cloth adorned with patterns that echoed the symbols on the egg, she exuded an air of quiet wisdom. Her weathered hands trembled slightly as she reached out to examine the glowing object. "It has been many years since I've seen these markings," she murmured, her voice tinged with both awe and sadness. "They're the language of our ancestors, the symbols of the old ways." The crowd leaned in, hanging on her every word. Nia continued, her tone measured. "There is a legend, an old one, told only in whispers. It speaks of a time when the land would choose a bearer, someone through whom the ancestors could send a message. The legend says that this bearer would bring forth life in a form unseen by human eyes, a life meant to unite the fractured tribes and restore balance to the land." Her eyes met Salika's, her gaze unwavering. "This egg, it is that message." The revelation sent a shockwave through the crowd. Gasps and murmurs erupted, the villagers struggling to process what they had just heard. Some looked at Salika with newfound reverence, while others clung to their fear. "Unity," Ao scoffed, his voice cutting through the noise. "What unity could come from something so unnatural? This is not our way." Nia's expression darkened. "And what is our way, Ao? To fear what we do not understand? To destroy what we cannot explain? The land has spoken, and it has chosen Salika. Whether you like it or not, this is bigger than all of us." The storm outside had reached its peak, rain pelting the ground in a steady rhythm. Thunder cracked, its deep rumble echoing through the clinic. Inside, the glow of the egg remained steady, unwavering against the chaos around it. Zalika, overwhelmed by the weight of Nia's words, looked down at the object in her hands. It no longer felt foreign or frightening. It felt like a part of her, as if her very essence had been intertwined with it from the start. The villagers, torn between their faith in tradition and their fear of the unknown, waited for someone to speak, to make sense of the growing tension. But there were no easy answers, no simple solutions. The egg pulsed again, a gentle warmth radiating outward, as if reminding them all that its true purpose had yet to be revealed. The storm outside was only a prelude to the storm brewing within their hearts, and the path forward was as uncertain as the flickering light of the egg. Word of the glowing egg spread beyond Nyamura, traveling through the winds like an ancient song carried to neighboring tribes. What began as whispers turned into fervent declarations, some claiming the egg was a divine blessing, others insisting it heralded doom. By the third dawn, Nyamura was no longer the isolated village it had always been. Strangers arrived in groups, their faces a tapestry of emotions: curiosity, reverence, and most alarmingly, hostility. The air buzzed with tension as debates erupted around the village center. Fires crackled in hastily set up camps, the smoke mingling with the voices that grew louder with each passing hour. Elder Ao seized the moment to rally those who shared his fear. Standing atop a large stone, his voice boomed, commanding the attention of villagers and outsiders alike. This egg has disrupted our peace. It has brought strangers to our land and chaos to our lives. Do you not see? It is a symbol not of hope, but of destruction. If we do not act, it will consume us all. His words were met with scattered applause, but the divide among the crowd was evident. Many nodded in agreement, their faces shadowed with fear, while others remained silent, uncertain but unwilling to condemn Zalika or the egg. Inside the clinic, Zalika sat with the egg cradled in her lap, her body frail but her spirit unbroken. She could hear the murmurs of the crowd outside, their voices rising like a storm threatening to burst through the walls. Dr. Kamari paced the room, his frustration mounting. "This cannot go on, Zalika," he said, his voice heavy with worry. "If they continue like this, someone will act out of fear, and I don't know if I can stop them." Zalika looked up at him, her eyes clear despite the exhaustion etched into her face. "I was chosen for this, Kamari," she said softly. "The egg, it isn't just mine. It belongs to them, to the land. They must see it for what it truly is, not what their fear makes them believe." Her voice carried a quiet strength, but the burden of her words weighed heavily in the air. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the savanna in hues of deep orange and purple, the crowd outside reached a fever pitch. Neighboring tribe leaders stepped forward, each with their own demands. Some called for the egg to be revered, to be kept as a sacred object that could unite their fractured communities. Others, spurred by Ao's rhetoric, demanded its destruction, convinced that it was a harbinger of catastrophe. The arguments grew heated, voices clashing like swords in battle. Zalika knew it was time. Summoning the last reserves of her strength, she stepped out of the clinic, the egg held high in her hands. The crowd fell silent, their collective gaze fixed on her fragile figure, standing against the vast, darkening sky. Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of truth. "This is not a curse, it is hope," she began, her words cutting through the thick tension. "I did not ask for this, but it was given to me, to us. The land speaks through this egg, and it tells us that we are more than our fears, more than our divisions." Ao stepped forward, his expression hardened with determination. "And what if you're wrong, Zalika? What if this brings ruin to everything we've built?" His question hung in the air, a challenge that demanded an answer. Zalika's grip on the egg tightened, her heart pounding in her chest. "If we destroy it out of fear, we will never know what it could have been. Is that the legacy we want to leave? Fear, destruction, and ignorance." As the two stood locked in this battle of wills, the egg began to tremble in Zalika's hands. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as cracks formed along its glowing surface. The tension in the air grew unbearable, each second stretching into an eternity. The egg pulsed with light, brighter and brighter, until it was almost blinding. Then, with a sound like the first drop of rain on parched earth, the shell split open. From within emerged a bird unlike any the villagers had ever seen. Its feathers shimmered gold, each one catching the fading light of the sun as though it carried its own fire. Its eyes, deep and piercing, seemed to look into the soul of every person present. The bird spread its wings, and with a single, powerful cry, it silenced the crowd. The sound was not merely heard, it was felt, resonating deep within the hearts of all who stood there. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The bird took flight, circling above the crowd, its golden form radiant against the darkening sky. It flew over Ao, who fell to his knees, his face a mixture of awe and shame. It soared over the neighboring tribe leaders, who watched in stunned silence, their earlier arguments forgotten. Finally, it returned to Zalika, perching gently on her shoulder. Its presence was both a comfort and a declaration, as if it had chosen her not just as its bearer, but as its voice. The crowd stood motionless, their fear replaced by something new, wonder. The golden bird had turned their chaos into stillness, their division into unity, if only for a moment. But what this moment meant, and what it would bring, was a question that none could yet answer. The golden bird, now named Jirani, a word meaning neighbor in the ancient tongue, soared gracefully above the gathering, its wings catching the first light of dawn. Each movement of its shimmering feathers seemed to calm the storm of emotions that had engulfed the crowd just hours earlier. The tribes, who had stood divided in fear and suspicion, now watched in silent awe. Jirani circled above them, a radiant symbol that demanded unity without a single word. The bird descended slowly, perching on Zalika's shoulder as if it had always belonged there. Zalika stood at the center of the gathering, her body frail, but her presence unyielding. Her connection to the bird was undeniable, as though their bond transcended the physical. A hush fell over the crowd, broken only by the faint rustle of the wind and the occasional crackle of the dying fires. Even the most hardened skeptics felt their resolve waver in the presence of something so extraordinary. Elder Ao, whose voice had once stirred fear into the hearts of the villagers, now stood apart, his staff trembling in his hand. The weight of his earlier words seemed to press down on him, his pride battling with the undeniable truth before him. Slowly, he stepped forward, his movements deliberate, each step a visible struggle against the burden of his doubts. When he reached Zalika, he lowered himself to his knees, his head bowed. "Forgive me," he said, his voice cracked with humility. "I let fear cloud my judgment. What you carry is not destruction. It is a gift, a truth we were too blind to see." Zalika looked down at him, her expression one of quiet forgiveness. "We all fear what we do not understand," she replied softly. "But understanding begins with an open heart." Her words carried beyond Ao, reaching the ears of every person present. The humility in Ao's gesture sent ripples through the crowd. One by one, others began to kneel, their heads bowed in acknowledgement of the moment's profound significance. The neighboring tribes, who had arrived with their own intentions, some seeking blessings, others prepared for conflict, now found themselves united in awe. Their leaders approached Zalika, each extending a hand in a gesture of peace. "We were wrong to see this as a threat," said one elder, his voice steady but filled with regret. "Perhaps this is a sign that we have been divided for too long." It was in this shared recognition that a pact was born. The tribes, many of whom had harbored old grudges and deep mistrust, agreed to set aside their differences. They would preserve their lands and traditions while embracing the mysteries that united them. Symbols of their unity were exchanged: beads, feathers, and carved stones, all offered to Zalika as tokens of their newfound alliance. Jirani watched from her shoulder, its gaze moving from one tribe to another, as if ensuring the sincerity of their promises. The transformation of Nyamura was not immediate, but it was profound. The story of Zalika and the golden bird spread across the savannah, reaching distant villages and stirring imaginations. For some, it was a tale of divine intervention. For others, it was a story of human resilience and the power of unity. What could not be denied was the impact it had on those who had witnessed it firsthand. The people of Nyamura, once divided by fear, now thrived as a community strengthened by their shared experience. Zalika, though still regarded with a mix of reverence and wonder, continued her work as a healer. But now, she carried with her a role much larger than the one she had once known. Jirani was her constant companion, a living reminder of the balance between the old ways and the new. Together, they traveled beyond Nyamura, visiting the tribes who had once stood divided, sharing the story of the egg and the bird as a lesson in unity and trust. The legend of the golden bird became a story whispered under starry skies, told by elders to wide-eyed children. It was said that Jirani's cries still echoed in the hearts of those who heard it, a call to embrace the unknown with courage rather than fear. In time, Nyamura became a symbol of what could be achieved when people chose understanding over suspicion, a beacon of hope in a land often overshadowed by its challenges. For Salika, the journey was far from over. She knew that not all mysteries could be explained and that some questions would remain unanswered. But as she stood under the vast African sky, with Jirani perched beside her and the hum of life all around, she felt at peace. The egg, once a fragile shell of uncertainty, had hatched into a promise that not all miracles fit neatly within the bounds of understanding, but that their impact could be felt for generations to come. If you enjoyed this video, please help us grow by subscribing to this humble channel. And if you'd like to watch more videos like this, we prepared the next video especially for you. Click here to watch.